Hey guys, Idris here from Just Another Night, and welcome back for another video. Today we're finally going to do the long awaited review for Absolute Carnage. For those of you who listen to our podcast, you'll know I've talked about this comic quite a lot, and I'm very much excited to let you guys know what I think and, what I hope to see in the future. Before we do get into it, I just want to warn you guys, there will be some spoilers. Also, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. It will be greatly appreciated. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Absolute Carnage was announced back in March 2019 and was published in August 2019. It's written by Donny Coates and illustrated by Ryan Stegman. It's such a great comic because it incorporates so many different characters and it pulls together every single symbiote or symbiote host that has been. It's so immense and it leads up to such a big sort of universe altering event. So the story follows Eddie Brock, Venom and Eddie Brock's son Dylan, and what essentially has happened is Cletus Cassidy and Carnage has been resurrected and he's now appeared as Dark Carnage, and honestly it looks crazy. So he's got a new look to him. He's a more of a darker coloured Carnage with a red hue, as well as this white spiral on his forehead. But he's also gained a couple of new abilities, such as spawning loads of sort of mini versions of himself to take on enemies. Well, I say enemies, but to take on some of the heroes. As you go through the story, you find out that what Carnage is trying to do is get to every single host and symbiote. When a symbiote takes a hold of a host, he leaves some form of a codex. And by gathering all these codexes, they're able to resurrect the symbiote god known as Null. So going through the story, you find out that Null was betrayed by the other symbiotes, and they essentially trapped him in a body of symbiotes, and that's what's kept him locked away all this time. And Carnage wants to become the sort of right-hand man of Null and bring him forth, just to bring about absolute destruction. The comic very much does live up to its title. It is Absolute Carnage. And because it's drawn so well, there's so many graphic panels, and it just keeps you engaged all the way through. There's even a scene where there's a mass burial and you can see him in that sort of spiral shape that represents Dark Carnage. It's such a great comic book, both visually as well as for the story. As mentioned earlier, it does incorporate Marvel characters that have previously been hosts to the symbiote, as well as the villains. And because of this, it leads to some very epic battles, especially with one that takes place on Rikers, involving Norman Osborn and a huge army of Dark Carnages. And throughout the story, you get to see more and more of these characters come back and actually try and help save the day, which is quite unusual because Eddie Brock doesn't like to team up with some of these characters, especially the likes of Wolverine or Captain America. But you can see Eddie Brock sort of becoming a new person. Like, he wants to do good for his son, and that's what motivates him throughout. Despite how it ends, it's absolutely great to see his sort of development all the way through. Especially at one point where Captain America essentially praises him and says, well, you're worthy of being a hero, essentially. It does end on a huge cliffhanger though. They do manage to resurrect Null, and I am looking forward to seeing the next issues. It will be out on December this year, they've announced, so there is going to be a sequel. And I feel like the way Null's been described as this huge, god of destruction and chaos, it can be an event that will alter the Marvel Universe as a whole, or it will at least bring in many more Marvel characters to help fight this cataclysmic event. The comic is currently 5 issues long, but it does feature some sort of one-shots as well as a few tie-ins and prequels. Some of these include Miles Morales and Deadpool. Because of how many people have been a host, it does skip over a few of them. But if you want them more detailed, you can easily find their stories and how they get changed and what they do in the lead up to what happens in Absolute Carnage. And that was another one of Dark Carnage's powers. He's able to manipulate some of the previous hosts and turn them into Dark Carnage versions of themselves. So it gives them additional abilities. One of the greatest ones was probably Miles Morales. Like, some of his new abilities and how he looks is actually pretty cool. So I personally enjoyed this comic for many reasons. One, it's visually pleasing. Two, it's very, very graphic and it very much lives up to his name. And three, just the introduction of the characters as well as this whole symbiote god null. It's something that they can use for a long time. It's something that's going to incorporate many more characters, and potentially it would be great to have a film out of it. I feel like it's quite dark, it's quite gruesome, and that's why it appeals to the older audience. So it's not one that I'd recommend so much for little kids. It'd also be great to see how the story continues, because as I said, Null is meant to be this god of symbiotes and is meant to be like a dark and destructive force. So it'll be quite interesting to see how he comes to Earth and what he plans to do when he arrives, and whether or not he brings an army with him or if he's more of a solo kind of person, considering the symbiotes had turned against him and they're what caged him in the first place. So I'd highly recommend this comic. As I said, it's such a good story and there's a lot that happens in it, and I don't want to give too much away, but again, because there's so many characters involved, there's so many different sort of plot lines going on at once, but you don't lose track of it. It's quite succinct, so you're able to follow it with ease, and it'd be great to see more of the sort of symbiote mythology come to life as well. So with that pretty much sums up the review for Absolute Carnage. It's such a great story, like there's no reason not to check it out. But for the next video I will be reviewing a Batman story, and that is Batman The Last Night on Earth. It's one that I've gotten recently, and a friend of mine got that for my birthday, so I've given that a read, and it's such a great story as well, like especially how that ends up. So definitely stay tuned for that video. Also be sure to check out our podcast, as I mentioned earlier on, and some of our other YouTube videos. We have started doing highlights of our podcast, so if you don't have time to listen to those, you can always just check that out. And we've also started doing a debate centre, so once every 4 weeks or every month, me and Curtis will be debating some of the biggest topics at that point in time, so stay tuned for those because they're definitely an interesting listen. But as always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, stay safe, and thanks for watching.